Excuse the face, as you can see it's still paralysed and will be for quite a while yet. However, there are very small signs of improvement, so if I do this sometimes it just helps me to talk. A couple of thank yous. I'd like to thank the phenomenal amount of subscribers that have found interest in the videos that I do. I just reached the 3,000 mark last week, the sort of Wednesday of last week. Absolutely blown away by it. I'm amazed that so many people find interest in what I have to say. Thank you very much indeed. It's been absolutely superb. The other thing is, I'd like to thank Carl Jacobson and Alan Simpson for managing to coax me down from the bell tower in Paris last week. Otherwise I'd still be there ringing bells instead of doing a bit of wood turning. So thank you both very much indeed. We had a little bit of a joke between us, and it certainly brightened up my bad days I had last week. Thanks lads, very much indeed. Today's video isn't going to be about a project as such. After last week's video I had a lot of questions regarding bandsaws. I'm not an expert on bandsaws. This isn't a masterclass. It's going to take you through the very basic operation of a bandsaw, the do's and don'ts in my opinion, and how a bandsaw can work for you. And providing you maintain it properly and keep the key features in good operating order, it'll give you many years of service, and you can do things on the bandsaw that are very difficult on any other. This bandsaw is the Record Power BS 400. It's a 2 horsepower saw, and it has a 12-inch depth of cut here, 16-inch capacity here, the throat. Now the main thing with a bandsaw is to keep it in good condition. It is really worth it when you first get your saw to set it up correctly. Spend the time setting up and adjusting everything to be just right, and then it works as it should do. A lot of people don't bother with these things to start with and then moan that the bandsaw doesn't do the job it should do. And it's mainly down to setup and a good blade. Like with anything, it's always advisable to get the best you can afford. Not necessarily in size, but in quality. And that is something that goes for everything in the turning world and any other craft as well. The basis of a bandsaw is 2 large wheels, one here and one at the bottom, and a blade goes around both wheels, hence bandsaw, and it goes around, the flywheels go around, and that feeds the blade downwards. So in actual fact it's one of the safest machines regarding cutting. Obviously if you get your fingers in the way it's going to take them off. Well, that's the same with any spinning blade or moving blade. But the beauty of this is that you're feeding the work in and you can't get kickback. The worst thing that you can get is either turning a circle too small a radius for the size of blade, and then the blade will either fly off the wheel. But say it flies off the wheel, what's going to happen? It's going to be inside. So the damage to you is only in this area here. Possibility. Everything is enclosed. So it's a very safe machine if used properly and sensibly. And the other thing that can happen obviously is it binds, that the blade will bind if you're not pushing it through correctly. But again, practice makes perfect, and if you adhere to the manufacturer's instructions on whichever bandsaw you get, you will have safe, good operation of the machine. Now this one actually you can't start it up until the doors are closed, and if you open the door it cuts out automatically because of the sensors on here, which is a good safety feature. I'll go through the setup now. When you receive your machine or you pick your machine up, the basic setup to start to use your bandsaw. Now, as you can see here, this is the upper wheel, that the blade, when you put the blade on, and again, I'm not going through how to put a blade on, etc., because that's all in your manufacturer's handbook and I'm no expert on that. I'll just warn you, be very careful when you uncoil a blade for the first time. When you put it on the wheel, I like to put the gullet, the base of the innermost part of the gullet, in the middle of the wheel. Some people say the tooth should be in the middle of the wheel. Well, that's fair comment. I found this to be far better. When you put the wheel on, when you put the blade on initially, make sure the machine is unplugged. When it's tensioned correctly, I have a tension release lever here, which I undo, which all bandsaws will have, which moves this wheel up and down. So when it goes down, it means you can take the blade off or fit a new blade. When you retension that, it's not going to be in the centre, so you spin it by hand and it'll move, and then there'll be a wheel there which will alter the tilt of the wheel, say the same sort of arrangement as you will have on your belt sander or any bit of equipment that has rollers which run in line. You have to alter them slightly to make sure that the sandpaper in a belt sander, in this case a blade, runs as you want it to. So that alters the angle of the wheel, and then this will move back and forth. When it's in the right place, then you lock down that lever and then the blade is in the right place. Then turn the machine on to check that everything's okay. Just quickly turn it on and then off again. Yes, it's running where it should do, so that's fine. So you've got the blade in the position that you want it. You have got the tension correct. There are various ideas on tension. You know, you put it up to the maximum and you press it very lightly with your finger and it should move a quarter of an inch and so on. I found that the best way to do it, if it's cutting right, that's the right tension. So you have to do a little bit of messing about, do some riffing, do some circles, etc., whatever you want to do with it, and if it's working as you want it to work, then the tension is correct. Once you've done the tension, once you've got the blade running in the middle of the wheel, of the tyre of the wheel, then you go about altering the assembly here, which consists of the blade guides, one there and one there, and the blade travels between those blade guides. And at the back here is the thrust bearing, and that stops the blade going back too far when you're cutting. Always make sure your machine is turned off before you do any adjustment, or like now, it's turned off, not switched, it's not plugged in. He double checks. Okay, I'll move the camera now. I have to have it this side so you could see those two roller guides there, and they're adjusted on this machine by undoing the knurled knob, moving the internal knob until they are just not touching the blade, and all they do is keep the blade travelling as centrally as possible. So the idea is to get them as close as possible to the side of the blade without touching. And I'll show you what position they advise you to put it on. Okay, so now we can see the bearings here. These are the roller bearings, and the blade travels between the two of those. And this is the thrust bearing, and again, you need it as close to the back of the blade as you can, so that when you're cutting wood, as you can see here, obviously as you feed your material into the blade, it goes back naturally, and then it will, that spins quite easily. As soon as I put a bit of pressure on it, it stops, and it's only moved a 32nd of an inch, if that. And that is the idea, is that when it's actually not cutting wood, none of these bearings are in contact with the blade. But as soon as you start to move a circle one way or the other, that these blades come into play to minimise the movement from the vertical of the blade. And the important thing with your roller guides here is that they do not infringe on the teeth. So that, as you can see there, it is actually just behind the gullet. And that's what they suggest, because then when you do get that movement, it is rubbing on the flat part of the blade and not interfering with the set of the teeth of your blade. And if you adhere to that, then you'll have trouble-free running. The bottom underneath, there is a similar assembly underneath the table, a little bit more difficult to get to, but exactly the same principle applies. There are two roller bearings like this underneath, and again a thrust bearing, so that there are 2 points, one above the table, one below the table, that endeavour to keep the blade in the vertical plane. Providing those points are adhered to as near as you can to the blade on the top set and the bottom set, as near to the back as possible and as near to the sides without touching, then the setup is correct. One of the other questions I was asked was what blade you use. But full TPI I always find is an ideal tooth configuration for my blades. This is a 3/8. Now this 3/8 is what I call an all-purpose blade. You can rip with it, providing you're careful. It's full TPI, 3/8 of an inch is the distance, is the width of the blade here, and there are 4 teeth per inch. And I find that a good general purpose blade. If you're doing very heavy ripping of very large boards with the grain, then you need a bigger blade. In my opinion, you need something like a half inch, 3/4 inch minimum, and maybe as few as 3 TPI, because the less teeth per inch, the more chance of the waste and sawdust moving away from your cut and not impeding the cut carrying on through its path. If the teeth are too many teeth per inch, it's going to get clogged and it's going to have a much less efficient cutting ability. So as I say, I use 4 TPI even if I have a ½ inch blade, and even if I go down to my 3/8, it's all 4 TPI, and I find that great. This morning I ripped a cherry crotch which was about 11 inches tall and about 12 inches wide, I suppose, and I squared off the bottom, again using the bandsaw. So this was right at the top. I put that through and it made a lovely job, but it was slow. If I'd had a larger blade on, a beefier blade, it would have gone through a bit quicker, but I'm in no rush, it's not a problem. So this one stays on for everything I do basically, unless I'm doing an awful lot, which I very rarely do, a lot of long ripping, then I will get a larger blade. So my advice, 4 TPI, 3/8, and if you want another one back up, a ½ inch blade, and that's all. This will go up to 1 inch, but I've never got one. I don't think I'll ever need it, to be honest with you. I've heard people say, and I'm sure it's true, that their bandsaw isn't very powerful, but they spend a lot of money on the blade and it goes through like a knife through butter. I'm sure that's true. The other thing is extraction, obviously. The extraction on this is not really that great, I must be honest. I got it hooked up just to my shop vac, which is a pretty powerful one, but there are so many little doors and crevices and openings where the air isn't really causing a good vacuum. On dry wood it's not too bad, but on that cherry crotch this morning, obviously the sawdust is wet, heavy, and it wasn't extracting it that well. What I will say is, this is my advice, is always, after you've used it, at the end of the day, end of your session, clean it out. Because if you don't clean it out, especially if you're cutting wet wood, it's going to start to clog and it'll go, not necessarily rusty, but you'll have bits sticking on there. 2 minutes with a hoover and a brush is well worth it. And And that's basically all you need to know for the basic operation of a bandsaw. I haven't gone through in depth because that wasn't the reason for the upload. It was just to answer a few questions that I'd had, and I hope that those questions have been answered. And if there are any more questions that anybody has, just send me a line and I'll endeavour to reply. Well, thank you very much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Cheers now.